The day dawned gray and cold, with a light breeze that seemed to whisper condolences. The church was crowded, every pew occupied by solemn faces draped in black, their downcast eyes masking their personal tragedies. In the center, in front of the altar, a dark wooden coffin adorned with an abundance of white lilies reflected the soft candlelight. Ella, the widow, dressed in an immaculate black suit, clutched a lace handkerchief in her trembling fingers. Discreetly standing by her side was Felix, her lover, whose presence was a poorly kept secret, known to few and ignored by many.
"Are you okay?"
whispered Felix, offering his arm for support. She nodded slightly, her expression a mix of pain and anxiety.
"We must be strong today, more than ever,"
she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The ceremony continued with melancholic hymns and solemn prayers. The priest spoke about the value of life and the inevitability of death, his words resonating in the old church's arches. Ella and Felix followed the procession to the cemetery, exchanging glances from time to time, each step reminding them of the plan they had carefully crafted. Once the inheritance was settled, they could finally start a new life together, far from these shadows. In the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense. Sitting in leather armchairs before the heavy mahogany desk, they awaited the arrival of Dr. Silvera, the longtime family attorney.
"Do you think he suspected anything?"
Felix asked, his voice heavy with worry.
"Antoine trusted me,"
replied Ella, trying to sound confident.
"He never knew anything."
The click of the door announced Dr. Silvera's arrival, a man with a rigid posture and a scrutinizing gaze. He greeted Ella with a formal nod and placed the will on the table.
"Well, let's proceed with the reading of the will as required,"
said the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. Felix squeezed Ella's hand under the table. She took a deep breath, preparing for the moment that would change their lives, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Dr. Silvera unfolded the will with a firm hand, his eyes quickly scanning the lines before beginning to read aloud. Ella and Felix sat before him, their hearts pounding, each beat echoing their hopes and fears.
"I, Antoine Martin, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament,"
the lawyer began, his voice grave and devoid of emotion. Ella squeezed Felix's hand, his face reflecting an almost palpable anxiety. Ella and Felix exchanged glances, each trying to find comfort or anticipation in the other's eyes. Finally, Dr. Silvera reached the part they both dreaded and desired the most.
"Regarding the main distribution of my substantial inheritance,"
he paused, looking over his glasses at Ella, who swallowed hard.
"I decide that nothing will go to my wife, Ella Fonseca, nor to any individual who has had illicit relations with her, identified or not."
The ensuing silence was deafening. Ella felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Felix dropped her hand as if burned, but like her, he struggled to find words. Her voice trembled with incredulity and despair.
"Antoine confided his suspicions to me a few months ago. He hired a private investigator who confirmed his suspicions. He was devastated. This is not possible,"
said Felix, his voice filled with frustration.
"Is there any recourse?" "I'm afraid not,"
replied Dr. Silvera curtly.
"Antoine was very clear and took legal precautions to ensure his wishes would be respected without contestation."
Ella covered her face with her hands, sobs escaping through her fingers. The reality of her situation began to sink in. Not only had she lost her husband, but she was now disinherited and exposed. Felix stared into space, their plans for a future together collapsing before his eyes.
"If you'll excuse me, I'd like to give you some time to process this information,"
said Dr. Silvera, rising.
"I will be available if you have further questions later."
As the door closed behind the lawyer, the silence between Ella and Felix was filled with profound bitterness and disappointment. They both knew that beyond the inheritance, something more precious had been lost in that room. After Dr. Silvera's departure, Ella and Felix remained motionless in their respective leather armchairs, the silence a heavy barrier between them, each lost in their tumultuous thoughts. Ella was the first to break the silence, her voice muffled by emotion.
I can't believe he knew and went to such lengths to ensure we ended up with nothing,
she murmured, staring at the carpet under her feet. Felix, looking grim, replied in a tone that suggested both anger and despair.
I knew we should have been more careful. But now, what are we going to do? I gave up everything for you, Ella.
She raised her eyes to meet his.
I know, and I thank you for that. But now it seems we have lost everything. My God, what will people think? What are we going to do? The first thing we need to do is stay calm,
said Felix, trying to organize his thoughts.
There might be a way to contest the will, a legal detail that was overlooked.
Ella shook her head, pessimistic.
Dr. Silvera said Antoine had everything legally secured. I don't think there's anything we can do. And us?
Felix asked, fear creeping into his voice.
Does this change everything between us?
Ella sighed, a deep sadness settling on her face.
I don't know, Felix. I don't know if there will be an us after this. Everything was built on secrets and hopes for a life we will never have.
Felix got up, pacing in frustration.
So that's it? After everything we've sacrificed?
She looked at his back, feeling the weight of reality crush her hopes.
I need to think. We need time to see things clearly. Time,
murmured Felix, stopping to look out the window. The sky was darkening, and the first drops of rain began to fall softly on the glass.
Yes,
she replied, her voice almost inaudible over the sound of the rain.
Time may be the only thing we have left now.
They both knew that the decisions they made next would determine the rest of their lives. But in this moment of pain and uncertainty, the future seemed more distant and darker than ever. In the days that followed, the rain did not stop, as if the sky itself shared Ella and Felix's sadness. Ella often found herself staring out the window of her living room, watching the raindrops trace random paths on the glass, reflecting on the twists and turns her life had taken. In one of those moments of melancholy, she heard a knock at the door. With a sigh, she got up and walked to the door. It was Felix, visibly distraught, but with a grim determination on his face.
Can we talk?
He asked as soon as she opened the door, his voice carrying a seriousness they had avoided during their last meeting. Ella nodded and led him into the living room.
Of course, Felix. Sit down.
He chose an armchair opposite her. For a moment, only the sound of the rain filled the space between them.
I've been thinking a lot,
Felix began, breaking the silence.
About us, about everything that has happened, and I'm sorry, Ella, for everything.
She looked at him, noticing the sincerity in his eyes.
I've been thinking too,
she replied.
And honestly, I don't know if I can see a clear path for us. I understand,
Felix said, pain evident in his expression.
Maybe it's better if we separate for a while.
Ella felt a pang in her heart, but she knew he might be right.
Maybe you're right. We need space to think and heal. And the money? The inheritance?
Felix asked, still looking for a glimmer of hope.
I'll talk to another lawyer, see if there's anything that can be done, but I don't expect much,
she explained, resigned.
I have to start thinking about how to rebuild my life, with or without the inheritance.
Felix nodded, visibly disappointed but recognizing the logic in her words.
If you need anything, you know you can count on me.
She gave him a small, sad smile.
Thank you, Felix. That means a lot to me.
He got up, hesitating before heading to the door. Before leaving, he turned to look at her once more.
Take care, Ella. You too, Felix,
she replied, feeling the finality of those words. She knew the weeks, months, even years ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt there might be a chance to start over, to build something of her own that wasn't based on secrets and lies. The house she had shared with Antoine now seemed large and empty, every room echoing with memories of a life she preferred to forget. Determined to move on, Ella began packing her things, ready to leave behind not only the house but also the town she knew so well. On a damp autumn afternoon, while packing books, she received a visit from Lucy, a longtime friend who had been distant during the turbulent months.
"Lucy, what a surprise,"
said Ella, opening the door.
"Please come in."
Lucy entered, a bouquet of sunflowers in her hand.
"I heard you were moving. I thought you might need some help or company."
Ella smiled gratefully.
"Thank you, Lucy. The help is welcome, and the company even more so."
The two women spent the afternoon organizing boxes and memories. Between moments of silence and light conversation, Lucy finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding.
"Are you okay with all this, Ella? I mean, after everything that has happened?"
Ella paused, reflecting on the question.
"I'm coping,"
she admitted.
"It was a shock, of course, but I think it was also a release. I'm ready for something new, something that is truly mine."
Lucy nodded in understanding.
"Do you know what you're going to do, where you're going?" "I've always loved the sea. I'm going to try something new there, maybe open a small bookstore like I've always dreamed of."
Lucy smiled, supportive of her decision.
"That's wonderful and very brave. It may be courage, or it may be desperation,"
said Ella, laughing.
"But it's a start, and I need that. You've always been stronger than I thought, Marie,"
said Lucy, placing a hand on hers.
"And I'll always be there, no matter the distance."
Afternoon turned into evening, and the boxes were stacked for the move. Ella felt exhausted, but a new energy pulsed within her, a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. After Lucy left, Ella closed the door behind her and looked around the nearly empty room.
"It's time to start over,"
she murmured to herself, feeling ready to face the future, whatever it might bring.